It was an early morning, the kind where the sky seemed to stretch endlessly, calm and clear. The boat gently rocked in the quiet water, and I felt the stillness of the lake seep into my bones. The air was crisp, fresh, almost like it was inviting me to stay in this peaceful moment forever. I had been on the water many times before, and I knew it well. The sound of the wind rustling through the pines, the ripples of water breaking against the hull of the boat, everything was perfect. But then, out of nowhere, I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A scream. A scream that was sharp and guttural, almost like something in agony. It wasn't human. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I just froze, trying to make sense of what I had heard. I turned, almost tipping the boat in the process, scanning the shore. My mind raced as I searched, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. At first, everything looked the same, just the water, the pine trees along the edge, and the sunlight flickering on the surface of the lake. The ripples of the water reflected the sunlight in a dazzling dance. But then, my eyes caught something on the far side of the reeds. A shadow, dark against the morning light, moving erratically in the water. I squinted, trying to focus. At first, I thought it was just debris, perhaps a piece of driftwood or an old log. But no. It was a shape, small, dark, struggling. My heart raced as I realized what it was. A puppy. A tiny German shepherd, trapped in the lake, barely managing to stay afloat. His small body floundered in the water, and I could see his legs kicking weakly. He was too far, too small, and I could tell the cold of the lake was already taking its toll. Instinctively, without hesitation, I kicked off my boots and tossed my fishing pole aside. I didn't think. I didn't question. I just dove in. The shock of the cold water hit me like daggers, sharp and immediate, freezing my body almost instantly. It was the kind of cold that robbed you of your breath, the kind that made every second feel like an eternity. But I didn't care. I wasn't going to let this little creature drown, not on my watch. I swam hard, focused only on the puppy. I wasn't a strong swimmer, but I kept my eyes fixed on him, the tiny German shepherd who had somehow ended up in this situation. The lake seemed to stretch forever, each stroke taking more out of me than the last. The water felt like it was pushing me back, trying to drag me under, but I kept going. Finally, I reached the reeds. I was out of breath, muscles aching, but I pushed forward. I reached down, and my hand brushed against something soft. It was the puppy. He was lifeless, limp, his fur drenched and cold. His little body felt like a rag doll in my hands. For a brief, horrifying moment, I thought I had failed. That he was gone. But then, just as I began to lose hope, I felt it. A twitch. A tiny movement. His paw jerked. He was alive. I couldn't believe it. He was alive. The tiny puppy I had feared was lost to the lake had just moved. I pulled him closer to my chest, cradling his small, soaked body as I kicked toward the boat. Every stroke was a battle against the freezing cold, my limbs heavy and stiff from the shock of the water. I could barely feel my hands, but somehow I kept going. Every second mattered. This was it. I had to get him back to the boat, to warmth, to safety. I reached the boat, my arms shaking with exhaustion as I pulled myself up. The puppy, now wrapped in my jacket, was still limp in my arms. He wasn't moving, wasn't breathing, and my heart sank with each passing second. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing on me, my mind racing. I needed to get him to help. I needed him to survive. I started the boat's engine, pushing the throttle to full speed. The motor roared to life, and I tore across the lake, my hands barely able to grip the steering wheel. My thoughts were a blur, but one thing was clear: I had to get him to the clinic. I didn't know if he'd make it, but I couldn't let him slip away now. Not after everything he'd been through. I reached the dock, the boat scraping against the wooden planks as I hurried to the clinic. My heart was pounding, my chest tight with fear. The air felt thick with the weight of the situation. I barely registered the sounds around me as I rushed through the door, still holding the puppy close to me. "Emergency!" I shouted as I entered the clinic, not waiting for anyone to ask what happened. "He's not breathing right. He was drowning in the lake." The receptionist jumped to her feet, and within seconds, a technician was at my side, guiding me to the examination table. I placed the puppy gently down, not wanting to let go of him, even for a moment. I stood back, my eyes locked on him, my fists clenched in helplessness. The veterinary staff immediately took over, their movements swift and practiced. They hooked him up to an oxygen mask, and one person worked on warming his body while another carefully pressed down on his tiny chest in rhythmic compressions. I stood frozen, watching, praying, hoping for any sign that he would pull through. And then, a miracle. The puppy coughed. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it was enough. His chest began to rise and fall, ever so slightly. The vet checked his heartbeat and muttered, "He's hypothermic, but he's got a pulse." My heart skipped a beat. "Will he make it?" I asked, my voice cracking as I struggled to hold it together. The vet paused, looking up at me with a calm expression but serious eyes. "If you'd found him 5 minutes later, we'd be having a different conversation." 5 minutes. That was all. 5 minutes had made the difference between life and death. The staff continued to work on him, moving him to a warming unit to help stabilize his body temperature. They administered fluids, monitored his vitals, and slowly, very slowly, his breathing steadied. I stayed by his side, my eyes never leaving him. I didn't know his name, where he came from, or how he ended up in that lake, but I knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going anywhere. Not on my watch. The hours that followed felt like days. The clinic was calm, too quiet, and I could hear the steady beeping of machines as the staff worked to stabilize the little puppy. He was so fragile, so delicate in his tiny form, but there was something else about him, a quiet resilience, a will to live. I stayed beside him, watching his chest rise and fall, each breath slower than the last, but still there. It was a small victory, but I clung to it. I could feel the weight of what had happened, the cold lake, the frantic swim, the sheer panic of not knowing if I was too late. I had saved him from the water, but now, it seemed, the fight was just beginning. The hours ticked by, the quiet punctuated only by the soft sound of footsteps and the occasional murmur from the clinic staff. But to me, it felt like time had come to a standstill. Each passing minute held a breathless anticipation. Finally, the vet came over to me. She stood still for a moment, just watching the puppy, before she spoke. "He's stable for now. We've got him warming up, but it will take some time before we know if he'll fully recover." She paused and then added, "You were right to bring him in when you did. If you had waited even a few more minutes—" She left the sentence unfinished, but I knew what she meant. I'd saved him. For now. It was all I could ask for. The technician gently placed a blanket over the puppy, and I watched as they continued to monitor his vitals, giving him fluids and slowly working to bring him back to life. I didn't move from my seat, my eyes fixed on him. He was still, so quiet, but the fact that he was breathing on his own now, no machines to help him, was enough to spark a fragile sense of hope inside me. I sat down beside him, placing a hand gently on his paw. His fur was wet, his pads cold as ice, but I felt a warmth growing inside me. He was a fighter, that much was clear. I whispered to him, "Come back, buddy. I'm here. You're not alone." As I spoke, I felt something stir beneath my hand. His paw twitched, and for a moment, I thought I had imagined it. But then it happened again, this time a little more pronounced. My breath caught in my throat. He was responding. Slowly, tentatively, as though waking from a long, cold sleep. "Good boy," I whispered softly, watching him closely. "That's it." The technician noticed the movement too and smiled. "He's responding. That's a good sign." Minutes passed, maybe an hour, and with each passing second Rex, as I had decided to call him in that moment, seemed to grow a little stronger. His breathing became steadier, less labored. I saw a flicker of life in his eyes, a small, hesitant glance up at me, as if he was trying to gauge whether I would be there when he opened his eyes fully. I smiled at him, fighting back the emotions threatening to spill over. "You've made it this far, buddy. You've got this." I spoke softly, not wanting to disturb him, but needing him to know that I was there, that I believed in him. The following days were a blur. The once lifeless puppy, now named Rex, began to show more signs of life. He still wasn't fully out of danger, but each small victory felt monumental. His eyes began to open, and slowly, cautiously, he started to move. He would shift his head slightly, and sometimes I would catch him staring at me with those deep brown eyes, as though trying to figure out who I was and if he could trust me. I spent every waking moment at his side. I sat with him during the day, letting him rest in the warmth of the clinic's recovery area. At night, I would stay up, watching over him, as his small body slowly but surely regained its strength. I was in awe of how resilient he was, how he refused to give up, even though he had been through so much. Every small twitch of his paw, every steady breath, felt like a reminder that he was fighting for his life, and that I was fighting right alongside him. But something started to gnaw at me. The puppy had clearly been through some kind of trauma before he ended up in the lake. The way he reacted to loud noises, the way his body tensed at sudden movements, it was clear that Rex had a past he wasn't yet ready to share. One evening, after the vet confirmed that Rex was stable enough to go home with me temporarily, I decided to visit the lake again. Something didn't sit right with me, and I needed to know the full story. I needed to understand what had happened to him before he found himself in that water. The shoreline was eerily quiet as I walked the familiar path along the edge of the lake. The sun had just begun to set, casting long shadows across the water. I walked slowly, letting my thoughts wander. Was Rex abandoned here? Did someone leave him to drown? I shook my head, pushing the thought away. There was no way someone would do that. But the more I thought about it, the more something in the back of my mind told me that I wasn't wrong. I reached a point along the shoreline where the reeds met the water's edge, just like the spot where I had found Rex. I bent down, running my fingers through the soft, muddy soil. And that's when I saw it. Half sunken in the reeds, partially hidden beneath the murky water, was a small aluminum boat. Its hull was dented and rusted, but what stood out to me was the rope tied to one end, trailing into the water. The rope wasn't tied for docking, it was looped in a way that made it seem intentional, like it was meant to leave the boat stranded and sinking. I walked closer, my heart sinking as I realized what I was looking at. This wasn't just an old boat, it was the place where Rex had been abandoned. I could see the faint remnants of a rope burn on the edge of the boat, and next to it, a small piece of fabric, blue, torn, and frayed. It was the same color as the ribbon tied around Rex's neck when I first found him. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Rex hadn't fallen into the lake. He hadn't gotten lost. He had been left there on purpose. Tied to the boat, left to drown. Someone had abandoned him. The discovery of the boat, the torn fabric, and the unmistakable evidence of abandonment left me shaken. I stood there for a long time, staring at the wreckage, the weight of what had happened settling in my chest like a heavy stone. Someone had made a decision to leave Rex to die, to let him drown, to give up on him as if his life didn't matter. I clenched my fists, the anger and heartbreak rising up inside me, but as I looked at the little puppy I had saved, I realized something important. Despite everything, he had survived. He had fought against the odds and made it through the worst of it. He wasn't a victim. He was a survivor. With a deep breath, I turned away from the wreckage and walked back to my truck. My heart was heavy, but I knew that Rex had already made it farther than anyone could have expected. He was still here, still fighting, and he had a long road ahead of him. But so did I. I couldn't change what had happened to him, but I could help him heal. I could give him a chance. The next few days passed slowly, each one marked by small steps forward. Rex was still fragile, still haunted by his past, but with each passing day, he became stronger. His ribs weren't as visible, his fur began to fill out, and his spirit seemed to return. But he wasn't just healing physically, he was starting to trust again. He would follow me around the house, watch me with those deep, soulful eyes, and sometimes I'd catch him wagging his tail, just a little. He was learning to feel safe again, and that, in itself, was a victory. But there came a time when I had to face the reality of the situation. I had taken Rex in to help him heal, to give him the warmth and care he needed to recover. But he wasn't mine to keep. He needed a family, someone who could offer him a lifetime of love and care, someone who could help him continue to grow and thrive. It wasn't easy, and it tore me apart to think about letting him go. But deep down, I knew it was what was best for him. I called Sarah from the rescue center, the woman who had been helping with his recovery. She was kind, professional, and I knew that Rex would be in good hands. We made arrangements for her to come by and take him to his new home. The day Sarah arrived, Rex looked up at me one last time. He didn't know what was happening, but he seemed to sense it. He sat at my feet, his head tilted, those deep brown eyes staring up at me, searching for an answer I couldn't give him. "Are you sure?" they seemed to ask. My heart clenched, but I knelt down and whispered softly, "You've got this. You're ready." With one last look, I let him go. Sarah gently clipped the leash onto his collar, and without hesitation, Rex followed her to the car. But before he got into the car, he turned back to me, as if asking, "Are you really sure?" I smiled through the tears that had come to my eyes. "You're going to be just fine, Rex." I watched them drive away, my heart heavy but full of hope for what Rex's future would hold. I didn't know what he had been through before he found me, but I knew that from that moment on, he had a chance at happiness. He had a chance to live the life he deserved, a life filled with love and care. And as I turned to walk back inside, I realized something. Rex hadn't just changed his life. He had changed mine. He had taught me about resilience, about trust, and about the healing power of love. He had reminded me that no matter how broken we might feel, there is always hope, always a chance to start over. Thank you for watching this story. If Rex's journey touched your heart, please share it. Every animal deserves a second chance, and together we can make a difference. Be a voice for the voiceless. Adopt, don't shop.